Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well done. Thank you very much indeed for surviving the lunch break and coming back in good order. Our next session takes us, well, we've gone already from the sort of political and policy ambition, then into the role of prisons, and now we move through the gate, beyond the razor wire, and to the world beyond, in a session entitled Community Support, What More Can Be Done in the Community and Through the Gate to Cut Reoffending. And I mentioned earlier this visit to Bristol prison that I made a year or so ago. Met this young man, 17 years old, literally about to be 18, and it was sort of November time, I remember, and he was due to be released on Christmas Eve, and we filmed him, and he was a charming young man who'd obviously made immense progress while he had been in prison, but he did tell me that he was absolutely terrified about being released, and the reason for that was that there was no one out there for him. He didn't have any family to go to, there was no support mechanism for him, nothing had been sorted out, and he was basically going to be forced, he felt, just to go back to the same people, probably relying on them to provide him with the sofa that he would sleep on, who got him into all the trouble in the first place. And his story, I think, will come as no surprise to many in this room. Indeed, the plight of that young man is, frankly, at the heart of everything that we've been talking about. So to consider what should happen, we have a high-powered panel. All our panels are high-powered, actually. I shouldn't need to say that. We have a panel, and they're high-powered. And we're going to do this one slightly differently. There is a lectern, non-lectern situation which we have. Some of the panellists would prefer to speak from the lectern. Others are happy to do it from a sedentary position. Since some wish to do it from the lectern, all will do it from the lectern. I've decided we're going to have a simple system put in place. And our first speaker is the Chief Executive of St Giles Trust, Rob Owen. Now, he's formerly an investment banker and with a CV that marks him out as an adventurer. You have completed, I'm told, the Devises to Westminster kayak race. Is this true?
That's true.
That is true, which I'm told is a pretty extraordinary feat. But you have seen St Giles Trust grow enormously in your time. You've won many awards. I think St Giles Trust is still among the Sunday Times best 100 companies. And of course, crucially, you've helped an increasing number of ex-offenders to rehabilitate. Do you want to do it standing or sitting, Rob?
All in. We're all in.
All in.
Together.
All
so
right.
I'll show.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Rob Owen.
Well, thank you, everyone. I suppose what I really want, the message I just want to get across very quickly, is that prison should remain a place and a time of purposeful work, and a place where actually we can start training people to help other people break their cycle of offending. I suppose one of the issues we're having at the moment is there's a huge focus on how we transform probation, and actually, in a way, that's only part of the argument, and a part of the session today is about how can you get a better linkage between the prison and the community. So it's how do we transform the whole system. And I suppose one of the things that St Giles Trust is most famous for is its Through the Gates work. And Colin earlier spoke I imagine very articulately about why it works and how it works, and what St Giles Trust tries to do so that you don't have that situation of a 17-year-old going out on on Christmas Eve with very little support put in place. There's a lovely story about one of our patrons, Jenny Agata, and she turned up on Christmas Eve and she said, Rob, I'd really like to give a couple of hampers for some of your clients that are coming out today. Would it be all right if I put a couple of bottles of decent Margaux in it? And to which my caseworkers at the time looked aghast and said, no, just toothpaste and loo paper will be sufficient, I suspect. I suppose, what's the USP about St Giles Trust? Well, we have a very simple belief that we want to be able to train very heavily selected prisoners in the prison system and get them to the right level that I, as an employer, can employ them to help 50 or 60 or so clients every year break their cycle of offending. I suppose for that, what you get is people like Colin out there, and the 150 or so we're able to train currently in our current level of expertise, and actually help people be met at the gate. I suppose it's very simple. What I have is the most amazingly passionate workforce. People have really been there and done it. And Mark, you kindly said that we're in the top 10 best companies to work for, Sunday Times companies to work for. And something summed it up to me a couple of days ago when I listened to a caseworker shout with genuine joy when he said, "Yippee, I've got a triple arsonist to house." And it sounds amusing to think about. When you hear it like that, it's fascinating to me. Who wants to work with such complicated people? Who's going to go that extra mile for them? And I think what we've found that actually, when you blend things together, when you use people that we've trained, ex-offenders, to work with other offenders, and you get someone who really, for the first time, puts in that commitment and that time and understands uniquely what they're going through, so they're not only just a caseworker, but they're actually a very positive role model, you can get transformative results. I suppose the thing I've been most focused at, and I know it's very difficult sometimes for statutory sector to do this because of the issues they face, but the one thing I learned from, I did an MBA before I became Chief Executive of St Giles Trust, was this wonderful thing called the service value chain. And it's a very simple model. If you genuinely make your staff, frontline staff, feel actively engaged, feel proud, and give them the scope to love their job, they will go the extra mile for your organisation. Now, it doesn't matter if you're Sainsbury's, it doesn't matter if you're St Giles Trust. If you put a lot of effort into helping your staff really love their job and give them the scope to really feel empowered that they can make a huge difference with clients, they will go the extra mile. If my staff go the extra mile, I know I will get better results. And we are very results focused. If we get those extra results, then we'll get hopefully funded for it and renewed funding. And it's really just as simple as that. People often say, what is it that, what evidence do you have that it really works? Well, the most interesting bit of work was done by Sir Gus O'Donnell a couple of years ago, and Frontier Economics very kindly did an evaluation on our work, which was funded by London Probation, which helped us work with 1,500 high to medium risk offenders. They were met at the gate by trained ex-offenders and using Police National Database, able to demonstrate that we were able to reduce additionally reoffending rates by an additional 40%. But for Gus, the most important thing was that for every £1 invested, it helped save £10 to the taxpayer over that year. Now, this is a big, bold claim. It wasn't our claim. It was done by economists, peer-reviewed across Whitehall, so I understand. But it just shows just how if you do things radically different, you can get radically better results. And on the back of that, we were selected to help deliver the Peterborough Social Impact Bond, many of you which will have come across. I am a huge fan of the Social Impact Bond. I think absolutely everyone wins out of it. For the first time, those being released from Peterborough serving less than 1 year got some helping hand at the gate. Someone like St Giles Trust, we get paid to deliver the work. The taxpayer wins because crime and reoffending with the most prolific offenders we're working with, because it's a frequency measure, has noticeably dropped. The only people taking a risk, and this is the real difference between a lot of funding streams and this one, is the investors who put up the upfront funding. It demonstrated that actually collaborative work is everything we must do together. If I've been at conferences for the last 6 years, it's always about working better together. And it's the same mantra. We know we have something very unique to offer in helping people break their cycle of offending. We know other sectors have something uniquely good and are world-class at it. We all need to understand exactly what we are good at. And I suppose for me, it is that persuasivity, it's that credibility, and it's that ability to go the extra mile from my ex-offender staff that sets St Giles Trust out. I think that's my 5 minutes.
That's it. Thank you very much indeed. Do come back. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Well, our next speaker is David Lloyd. Here is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire, having stood in last November's elections as on the Conservative ticket. He is also a former banker and now devotes his time. You are a former banker, aren't you?
I am.
You are. Now devotes his time to community leadership. Would you like to go to the?
I'll follow the.
We've gone for the podium.
Yes.
It's so far away that I can't lasso you back.
No, that's exactly right.
So
I'm always pleased to
please
see that.
stick to your time. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yes. And you're quite right. Having gone from banking to politics, I certainly know how to court popularity, don't I? But still, there you are. And thanks for that introduction. Policy Exchange has a great record of bringing together the right people as well as generating the big ideas. I believe that Max Chambers has hit the ground running and is building on a great track record of leading the thinking around home affairs issues. Getting straight to business. I think great things have been done on local offender management, but I agree with the Justice Secretary that there are significant elements of the rehabilitation picture which are ripe for review. As Jeremy said this morning, if we stick with the same system, we'll get the same old results. As well as the social cost, the financial costs of crime, not only to the Exchequer but to local business and to the local public purse, are huge. Conversely, getting rehabilitation right will bring massive benefits. The problem is that the cost and the benefits rise and fall in the wrong places. Investing upstream is the right thing for me to do for the people of Hertfordshire using their money. But the benefits generated by this investment may well be realised by a national court system, a regional rehabilitation system, or a prison far from my county boundaries. That makes early investment an unnecessarily hard sell for local commissioners and needs more thought. Others have said today, and I have been clear from the start, that partnership is vital to the success of this role. I bring to the table a policing and local government pedigree and preside over a strong force with an award-winning partnership approach to integrated offender management. It strikes me that commissioners are uniquely placed to drive all local agencies to work together cohesively. Police, probation, housing, jobs, linking in with health and well-being, and so on. Justice agencies working alone won't get the results we all want to see. I'm glad partnership has come up today, but I am concerned that PCCs have not been mentioned in the first sentence at all. Naturally, I'm impatient to see the potential of my role realised. I don't want to see a loss of nerve or of the momentum signalled by the move to get PCCs commissioning victim support services in 2014. I've negotiated to begin in shadow form this year. It seemed natural that probation would follow, with youth justice soon after. So for me, the reforms could go further still in the localisation of control and commissioning. It's all part of devolving power and decision-making to the most local level possible, the crux of the Prime Minister's localist agenda. That's not quite what we have here, but I am clear that we can make the Justice Secretary's proposals work both for the centre and for local leaders. Ministers know my thoughts on the proposals and know I want to help maximise their impact. However we tackle the reforms, I'll want to be closely involved in shaping plans and commissioning arrangements, and in making sure that we don't leave any holes in the net. I like the principle of payment by results. It reads well across to the commitments in my plan around both business sense and doing more to reduce reoffending. In many ways, I wonder whether we could go further with a market approach rather than risk stifling innovation with NOMS bureaucracy. I've been discussing how private providers can help me with my plans to get offender paying for rehabilitative and reparative activity, something I would like to see more of in the Ministry's proposals. Building on this would be straightforward. I'm mindful that payment by results can drive perverse behaviours, similar to the way the police have historically been misdirected in the chase after paper targets. It may be that police and crime commissioners can mitigate against this, providing leadership for the whole network of partners, as well as the public's interest in getting the right result. Commissioners can offer something new and unique. We can offer local energy and leadership inspired not by a desire to minimise disturbance, but by a desire to maximise the impact of these reforms. For the first time, we have an individual with a complete overview of crime and criminality at a local level. It's a role which sits above organisational boundaries and budgets, which sees the complete experience from preventative and cycle-breaking work through policing, through punishment and rehabilitation and back into the community. And of course, the more levers we have in our roles, the more fully effective we can be, particularly in terms of the and crime part of our remit. A stronger grip over rehabilitation services is a lever which this reform could make available, and I don't want to miss the opportunity. The final thought I want to leave you with is this. How best to deal with offenders in the community is something we've been grappling with for centuries, with a solution swinging between punishment and rehabilitation. Simplified arguments are fun in the pub, but these reforms need to be about something more nuanced. To build a system which prevents crime, including reoffending, we have to see the wider set of interactions. Probation work alone won't solve the issue. The solutions are in the interactions of communities, interactions between agencies, and in every interaction that offenders have with the state, from teachers to policemen to judges to doctors to prison wardens to probation officers and social workers and job centre staff. Forgive me for plugging my own work. I should have brought it here. I'll show it down there. But I have called my plan Everybody's Business, because I want to say to the people of my county, the people of Hertfordshire, that not only is it in everyone's interest to cut crime, it's also something every individual business and agency can contribute to at some level. So I think the principles here are sound, the structures for their delivery are to be discussed, and that we need to look beyond reliance on probation services to tackle reoffending alone. And it may just be that police and crime commissioners are the people to bring that local, nuanced thinking to bear. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Our next speaker is Paul Badal, who is the Chief Executive of NACRO, before which he worked for the prison service for 20 years, including a spell as Governor of Brixton Jail. He is also an inquiry panel member for the Make Justice Work campaign, which last summer produced a major report of its own on payment by results in community sentencing. Paul Badal.
I think I bought myself 30 seconds by getting here quickly.
Oh, well, you did very, very promptly. Well done.
Excellent, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the organisers for inviting me. Really important debate, this one. A really interesting time. The proposals that we're discussing here are significant and they're groundbreaking. And many of us working in criminal justice have been waiting eagerly for quite some time for this kind of reform and the opportunity to transform crime reduction outcomes. NACRO is one of the largest crime reduction charities in England and Wales, and we believe that these rehabilitation reforms have the potential to enable very significant change indeed. And we're clear that that change is desperately needed. Crime reduction outcomes are not currently good enough, and they've not been good enough for quite a long time now. And if we're going to impact on crime on the scale that victims and the public would like to see, then we cannot simply do the same things that we do now, but delivered by a different sector or a different supplier. We need a transformation in our approach. We need innovation. And we need a shift in thinking and design. And we need a fresh approach to the stubborn problem of reoffending that's blighting so many of our communities. We've already mentioned communities in the speeches from previous speakers, and that, it feels to me, is key. It's about embedding ourselves in communities, working directly with those communities to make a change and to give offenders an investment in those communities. I talk about crime reduction very passionately and purposefully because it's been my working life, and because at NACRO we really believe that the focus of the debate around crime reduction must be on what's needed to reduce crime and protect victims of crime in our communities. And it's that focus that will ultimately determine whether any new approach, supported by whichever financial model, delivered by any type of service provider from any sector, is successful in the years ahead. Now, in the criminal justice sector, we talk about what works. We do it quite a lot, but in reality, stopping someone who's entrenched in their behaviour and their criminal activity, stopping them from reoffending is really quite tough. And after nearly 50 years working with people in trouble, NACRO really does understand that. But we also understand that the measures you need to take to successfully steer someone away from crime are complex. We know the current approach is failing in far too many cases to ensure that we apply the appropriate interventions to individuals at the right time and critically in the right place. We know that community sentences reduce reoffending on average 8% better than short-term prison sentences. We also know that community sentences all too often lack imagination in their design and application. So, for instance, retention is often poor, attrition is often too high, and given those weaknesses, it's no particular surprise that reoffending remains consistently high. We know that if both the offender and the victim actively engage in restorative justice, the likelihood of reoffending falls. But we also know that restorative justice is rarely used as an effective intervention. We know that the use of a mentor, separate from the formal contact that the offender has with an authority figure, can have a significantly positive effect on the likelihood of reoffending. But we also know that there is too little use of mentoring as part of most community sentencing arrangements. We know that by coordinating social services, drug and alcohol treatment, housing provision, improving access to education and training and employment, we can reduce the likelihood of reoffending. We know that. We know all of those things. But we also know, critically, that it's all too rare that we see a joined-up approach as far as those interventions are concerned, either in prisons or as part of community sentencing. We know that reconnecting an offender with their community is most likely to secure permanent or long-lasting change and therefore reduce reoffending. The most successful programmes do that. We know this. They open doors to the community and they extend their reach with employers, with the community and local support services outside of the criminal justice system. It isn't all about what the criminal justice system does. But we know that all too often we miss those opportunities to build the connection. Now, providing those services in a joined-up way should be simple. It ought to be simple because we know all of those things that I've just said. But I know that many of you, like me, have attempted that for many years in prisons, in probation and in the voluntary sector. We've faced systematic blockages, we've faced financial constraints, and we've faced a reactionary media that still tends to think that the criminal justice system ought to be all about punishment. But we have to be honest about this, we've also missed far too many opportunities to solve those systematic weaknesses in the quality of our service design. But we've got a great opportunity now. We can move on from that agenda. We can develop a commissioning landscape that ensures resources are well connected in the way that I've described, that they're diverted to the front line, and they're allowed to be joined up together and designed from the perspective of the public and the victim and the offender. Now, in order to do that, providers must be commissioned on the basis of a proven track record of delivering results, regardless of the sector that they come from. And high-performing organisations should be enabled to play to their strengths. Now, I've heard a lot of debate in that sense in recent months about how to secure a role for the voluntary sector in the new marketplace. And it's absolutely right to say that the voluntary sector is critical to the success of this venture. But what I'm going to say, this is really important now. There should not be a special case made for the voluntary sector. That would be totally wrong, and it would discredit the value and the quality of the services the voluntary sector is so good at delivering. We should be there on merit. We should be there because we will enable lasting change, because we have the experience, and because we offer value for money. And we should be there because we will drive reoffending, reducing reoffending outcomes. The criminal justice landscape is complex. To get the results and outcomes we need the right investment and we need strong partnerships. But they must be predicated on a clear understanding of individual organisational strengths and values which are aligned and clearly focused on effective delivery. Ultimately, we're clear what that's all about. Victims want to see the crimes that were committed against them are not repeated, and families want to see those who have offended have access to the help they need to move away from crime and to reintegrate them into our communities. Offenders, of course, want to see the removal of barriers and obstacles which they currently face so they can put their offending behind them. And the public at large, critically, wants a system that's fair, robust, effective and affordable. So there's the challenge for us all. It's time for us to respond to that challenge in an intelligent and critically a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. And Lastly, Heather Monroe, who is Chief Executive of the London Probation Trust, which deals with over 70,000 offenders and prepares over 33,000 court reports a year. The Trust, along with Serco, of course, won the contract to deliver community payback in London, the first outsourced community sentence provision. And Heather is also the joint Vice Chair of the Probation Chiefs Association. Heather.
Thank you. Yes, I am here talking on behalf of London Probation Trust, but also hopefully my 32 colleague chiefs, as I am Vice Chair of the Probation Chiefs Association. And I've got 38 years history in the probation service, so I often say I'm a bit like a stick of rock with probation running through the middle. But what that doesn't mean is that I believe probation can't change and evolve, and that there are improvements. And I think everybody, all the leaders in probation, recognise a lot of planks, some of the issues that are raised by the review that we see as very positive. So, competition. We do absolutely believe that competition can deliver efficiencies, and there's evidence of that from the London Community Payback outsourcing. And I know my colleagues, where they've been working towards competition, have driven through efficiencies. Our history of working with both the private and voluntary sectors, we absolutely believe that it's important to value the contributions of all the sectors. And as you've heard, we've been working with Serco in London, and many of the colleague chiefs have worked with Sodexo, G4S on a whole range of competitions, in the prison competitions, electronic monitoring, etc. And of course, our long history with the voluntary sector. I think every probation trust will have either contracts to deliver services by the voluntary sector, or will be working in partnership with them. And we absolutely believe that it's when the three sectors work together that we get the best results. And the use of mentors has come up. And again, it's something we do really believe in. As you heard, that it was St Giles and London working together some years ago that was able to demonstrate the results that Rob talked about here. That was a one-off chunk of money that was actually given to probation to reduce the prison population. And then that one-off chunk of money was taken away from us. And the problem for probation is often, how do you find those resources to spend on projects which we know will work and make a difference, because most of our resources tend to go on staffing, and that's quite hard to flex and make changes with to deliver a different service. But having said that, we have been doing that. And again, I think most trusts have seen through the desistance research how important it is to use mentors and volunteers, and that idea of an offender having real hope and somebody who they can see in front of them who they can follow. So, and we currently have a contract with St Giles and Catch-22 to deliver mentors and peer mentors. We certainly believe in under 12 months, working with the under 12 months. We've all been calling for that for years, and indeed a lot of the integrated offender management schemes do cover the work with the most prolific offenders in that group. Payment by results, we're not against that. We were keen on the pilots and got involved in those when they first started. We recognise the need for a professional body. We're keen on mutuals. And finally, we love the idea of innovation and flexibility. And I wish we'd had it, because if we'd had it, I think we would have seen much a bigger improvement. And we think there has been an improvement in the reoffending rates for those on community orders. But if we'd been given flexibility, end of year spend is a big one, and we've been asking for that since we became trusts, and it was initially promised. You can therefore flex. If we had control over our premises, over our IT, there'd be lots of ways in which we can be more innovative. Having said that, I think we are innovative. We've got schemes working on biometrics, lots of innovative practice going on in probation trusts. So you might wonder, why have probably most trusts put in responses, and including the probation chiefs, which raise serious concerns about the proposals. I'm just going to focus on three things. First one is the fragmentation, and this was mentioned earlier. The complex nature of the information exchange, the fracture of supervision. We know how important that relationship is, and changes cause problems. And there was a question earlier today about how many times does that change. We know from the inspectorate that 50% of cases there is a need to look again and reassess the risk, and in London 25% of those have meant a change in the risk. And this key issue for us is about who holds the ring, who is holding the responsibility and the accountability, who's making the key decisions, and we believe that should be one person. The second issue I'll talk about is this national commissioning. And Probation has seen themselves as a local organisation. We're a local delivery organisation. We work very closely with the police. We're very keen on the development of police and crime commissioners and our involvement in local commissioning. We sit around so many local partnerships, integrated offender management, community safety programme boards, health and wellbeing, it goes on endlessly. But we have to have a local focus, because that's where the resources are to move offenders out. That's where you access housing, etc. Now, we're very concerned that the national commissioning, which we don't think has worked very well in most of the cases where it's happened, we're concerned that we will lose our local focus. And finally, say something about the pace and scale. We are really concerned. It was mentioned earlier about, this is a massive changing the whole system to sort a particular problem out about the under 12 months. But there's also something about the pace of scale here. This is all to be done in 2 years. This is every bit of the system changing, and we're really concerned about what impact that will have. I'll probably stop there, but I'm very happy in questions to say something about community payback in London and the outsourcing.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Heather. And what strikes me is that we perhaps need to go back to the question that we're asking here, which is what more can be done in the community and through the gate to cut reoffending. You've all sort of set out, I suppose, some rather bigger thoughts than that up to now, and I'm wondering, before we go out for questions, just to get some sort of practical thoughts on what needs to happen in the community. David Lloyd, you talked about the need for partnership. You talked about obviously there is a tension here between national commissioning, between sort of regional providers, force area commissioners like yourself, and then obviously the local services. How can that line be made sort of as simple as possible and ensure that we can actually make things happen at a local level in communities?
Well, I think you've answered some of that in what you say yourself, because I think the danger is that we look to centralise rather than to localise. Actually, I think that by bringing people back into society, that's how you start to cut reoffending. I think one of the whole issues, the question I often ask people is, what sort of society do they want to live in? That's what I've asked really when I'm pushing out my plan. What sort of society do we want? And do we want one where reoffending is cut? And the better way of doing it is by taking choices locally and delivering locally. One of the reasons that things like community payback work so well in a local community, but we're not doing enough of it yet, is that people invite back those who've offended into their local community. And I think we need to find a way of ensuring that we have for want of a better word, a clearinghouse, which says what sort of jobs do we need doing over the coming year across each of our communities, and let's buy into those so that when someone has offended, they buy back that way. And some of so if you've got someone who's good at carpentry, that you don't just set them clearing weeds through a community payback situation, you get them doing some carpentry jobs so that everyone can feel proud of what they've done and bring them back in. So I think if you do things locally, it works so much better than if you say nationally this is what's going to happen.
And you think, is that practical in the way this thing is set up? Big regional providers, PCCs, sometimes with enormous areas covering a number of big towns and cities.
But that's why I'm looking to work with local partners. That's why it's through partnership. I've said probably in other places, but the PCCs are not going to deliver themselves on their own. I mean, my team is 8 people. Actually, it is through police on one hand and through all those other partners that we're going to deliver. And that is where you get in local borough councils, you get in the local district councils, the local parish councils, you get right down to there, but also to local organisations, perhaps even the local churches. You get them involved so that is how you start to deliver that rehabilitation.
But Paul McDowell, this business of communities involved in the way that local offenders are treated and trying to help them go straight, is there a risk in the way that the bureaucracy, the setup is with the national commissioning and so on, PCCs and regions and so on, that actually they're going to find it quite difficult to get to that point?
There is a risk, absolutely there's a risk, and the design, therefore, the concept that sits behind the delivery of the services in the end will be critical. I don't think having a discussion about how local the service provision is in the end on the basis of a region or an area or a county, I don't think that gets to the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue here is what's the experience for the individual offenders? What sort of services do they receive? How do you wrap around the appropriate interventions, including, by the way, any reparation that we think is appropriate for them? So this is about one of the big weaknesses in the system for many, many years now is that the way that services are commissioned through government departments separates out the different interventions that the individual offender benefits from. So there's no connectivity between the housing services funded by DWP, the education services by the Department of Education. You get where I'm going with this. I can describe all of those things.
Well, Rob, this idea of sort of ownership, this idea that there's a single person, you mentioned this as well, I think, David, that somehow that some person takes responsibility. Is that the way through?
Yeah, look, I have a very simple dream, if you want to put it that way, that every offender coming out of prison is met by a very motivated, well-trained, well-managed peer advisor, peer mentor, ex-offender, paid member of staff, and they get intensive support for 3 months. Right. Okay, that's the crucial time whether someone will or won't, well, it's actually a couple of hours sometimes, whether someone will or won't go on to reoffend. And it's a very simple, pragmatic support. It's not about holding someone's hand. It's about making sure that there's pragmatic solutions around housing, which is a critical need. Yeah. It's around getting people job ready, progressing towards work, and actually just giving some support. It's that simple.
Is it though? This individual who might be an ex-offender, who might be very motivated in telling people, look, I went wrong, I can help you go straight. Yeah. Actually, they are going to need to be experts in housing provision, mental health services, in alcohol, drug rehabilitation.
This is why for us it takes 6 months worth of training, and it's absolutely, these guys and girls are the glue. And as Paul very clearly said, they're silo bashers. They can help people navigate the system so the system gets the best result for that individual.
Well, just to back, in a sense, we're saying exactly the same thing here. NACRO already provides housing services and education service and resettlement services, a whole range of things. We're already doing lots of those different things. Where we get hindered is in our ability to join those services up, because commissioners demand particular things from us in particular locations. So we're not able to bring those things together. You see, in the sort of situation you're describing, what happens is the mentor does not have to be an expert in everything or know exactly what to do in every set of circumstance. What they need is to know where to go to get the help, to signpost the offender in the right way, and make sure that there's a single point of contact to guide the process and help that offender to deal with all of the problems at the right time and the right place.
Isn't that what probation officers do?
It is, yes. So we are that point of contact, and we do have expertise, and we use other organisations when we need to. It does feel a bit like that, and we know there's a gap, and I think it's absolutely right. This through the gate is the right thing to do, and we want to see people getting locked into services quickly. We're not working at the minute with that group of people, these under 12 lads, and it does feel a bit like 70% of our work is being taken away from us to fund this gap. And in that 70%, there are some very complex cases. So in that medium risk, in London, that's 73% domestic violent offenders. It's 56% gang offenders, 20% are sex offenders. So, you're putting in this pot some people that really need to be managed by experts. And yes, there are going to be lower risk offenders and they can have a whole different approach. We absolutely accept that. But I think we do need somebody who is well trained to hold the ring.
Ex-offender, 6 months training, can it be done?
I think with certain low-risk cases that it's potentially possible, but I think there still needs to be somebody that they could refer back to and check out if issues seem to be arising. But I think as you go up the scale, the more you need involvement from probation. And we have come up in most of the trusts have come up with models. We're not saying this isn't workable, so we have come up with options, but it isn't a 70-30 split. I think we're thinking this, it may well be more a 50-50 split.
Okay, we'll take some questions from the floor. Gentleman at the back and gentleman over there. Yeah, just the gentleman there and then the gentleman there. I've seen you. We'll come to you in a second.
Thank you. It's Mike Pattinson. I'm Director of Operations for CRI. So it's I'll try and find a question somewhere in all of this. I think lots of the talk today has been about almost that things can be done by mentors and mentoring in isolation. I don't think anybody, you know, we have something like 1,000 volunteers and 1,000 peer mentors working in our organisation. As many mentors or as many people working in the voluntary capacity as we have paid employees. They're not doing the same job. We're not talking about the transforming rehabilitation isn't about getting somebody to do this complex work cheaper or for free, because it isn't free, as Rob will say, it takes a lot of training. So that's just a kind of observation, I guess. Somebody asked earlier on about how many mentors can you be. In our experience, there are the only kind of barrier to entry is actually the organisation's capacity. There are lots of people who want to give something back and give their time to helping people. I think part of the challenge for all of us is where are what we're trying to avoid is a thing that, you know, an ex-offender can only be a mentor. Where are actually the career pathways for people? So around about a third of our workforce come from a service user background, whether that's through drug treatment or whether that's through offending services. So where's the commitment for all organisations to have highly visible ex-offenders, ex-service users employment positions? And I think the other challenge for all of us, I don't know how I'm going to get a question out of this, the other challenge for all of us is actually about not seeing offenders as alien to our communities. They're part of our communities. They have our families. And until we take an approach that is a community-led, societally-led approach to inclusivity, we're always going to be in a position of just managing conditions rather than leading to rehabilitation. Okay,
it wasn't a question, but it was jolly interesting. Thank you. Over there.
Phil Bowen from the Centre for Justice Innovation. Firstly, a question for Heather. What's been the cashable saving from the Serco London Community Payback contract, and why were those savings not realised previously? And then for David, I totally agree with you that PCCs over time should be commissioning probation services, but I believe there was some feedback from PCCs saying they're just simply not in a position to do that in the next couple of years. When do you think they would likely to be able to do that commissioning?
Okay, Heather, do you want to pick up first of all on the community payback thing? What are the cashable savings?
Well, I think what we need to do is sit down, and we are planning to, with the MOJ, and try and bottom out what we're all counting in our figures, because London certainly don't quite recognise the 37 or nearly 40%, but I mean it does depend what we're counting. It could be apples and pears here. What I would say is there were significant savings, and from our reckoning it's probably around about 20 to 25% at least. So they are.
Why wasn't it done before then?
Okay, well I think London, there is a particular history in London which does mean it may not be replicable elsewhere, and that is because in London they had two previous attempts to do outsourcing from within the trust. First one failed. This is before my time, I should say. First one failed. The second one was pulled by NOMS. Now, the idea was to keep the savings and reinvest those savings, had it done the outsourcing itself. Now, I don't think it's a good idea to do. I think you should make the savings first before you do the outsourcing. But anyway, so... and instead, what NOM said is, no, having gone a long way down this route, no, we're going to do this nationally, and then they kept the savings. While London was doing all of that, it wasn't doing what other trusts were doing in terms of generating those savings themselves by...
Do you think actually other places are already ahead of London?
I think absolutely, and I can see nods from my colleague chiefs here that they would say a lot of the things that have been done as part of this outsourcing have already been done elsewhere. So there is less savings
capacity
to be
for
achieved.
saving. Okay. And David, yeah, probation commissioner.
I mean,
do you think it can happen?
Certainly. Let me first of all come back to what Mike was saying, because Mike was talking about all these different layers and, mentors and mentoring shouldn't happen in isolation. I still think, and I don't think I've ever got one original idea, but if you look around to see what others are saying, all this thriving family work is about trying to make things simpler, not more difficult. And this is entirely in that area. So, yes, mentoring is required, if that's what you call it, but that mentoring might be provided by the police or probation or education or children's social care or adult social care or any of those other agencies which get involved. And I think one of the problems is all of this sort of piling one upon another, giving people so many interventions that none of them are working.
I'm slightly confused here, because I'm imagining from what Rob said is that somebody comes out of prison, and Chris Grayling's talked about this, there will be somebody there to meet them, a face who will stay with them, who will help them get a house and sort out their particular challenges, and will effectively be the guide, the mentor through to their resettlement and rehabilitation. But you're talking about police officers,
well,
too.
that assumes that the people who come out of prison aren't coming back into society. Currently, how we run society is that housing, actually, if you need a housing option, you'll have to get to the housing authority or the local association. If you need a medical intervention, you'll do that via your local GP or perhaps through the mental health trust or whatever.
Do you think that should retain that system?
Well, I think that, yes, we should look to see if we can have someone to mentor through, but I think we need to stand back and ask how many of those different pieces of work need to be done. And if you look at what happened, I think it was in Swindon, where they started to pull out some of what was happening, the interventions that people were having, and what's the interventions which we talk about negative state millionaires, where people are having so much intervention, that isn't working. I don't mind spending £1 million on people if we get it right. It's spending £1 million and still not getting it right is the issue. Okay,
I'm still slightly unclear. So when you don't necessarily think that there should be somebody at the prison gates?
No. Yes, I do think there should be someone at the prison
gates. And who
is
that person?
And that's the exact point. It doesn't have to be another organisation which provides. It can be one of a series, but it does need.
Could it really be a policeman?
The policeman's the first of the list. No, I'm not saying it's necessarily the policeman. Although
could it at all be a policeman?
Well, it could be. It could be. It could be if that is appropriate. If it is it depends how you want to get that to work. And remember, I'm about crime reduction, not about policing. That's the end that I'm interested in. But it might be that in some cases a policeman actually visiting someone as they come out of prison might not send a very bad message. And, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a negative thing. For other people, that isn't the right message. But let's actually get it right. What we need is someone who can put those people back into society. That's what I'm talking about.
Rob.
But there was another bit there that the specific question, which is the one-liner, when could you take it on? I think that the police and crime commissioners in this new landscape should be taking it on now, not putting it off and saying it another time. Okay.
Rob.
I have very strong views about who makes good person to meet someone at the gate. I mean, I would certainly say absolutely not someone in uniform. I mean, I think Bernard Hogan Howe would be mortified if he thought he's going to have to resource that. What you've got to do is understand that most of the people we're working with, and actually one of the things that is very interesting to me is our ability, charity's ability to actually engage with the most dislocated, those who have been let down by the state, let down by their family, let down by everyone. For the first time, they'll be able to interact with someone because they feel there's this degree of trust and understanding. And for us, it's about the credibility that comes with someone being able to say, well, what would you know? The client says, well, what would you know? And the guy or girl can say, well, I've spent the last 6 years in prison, or I've done this and that. And there's this big ability to work. And I think the thing I find most impressive about the work we do at St Giles is the reverse cherry-picking nature. In fact, we're better at working with the most difficult, the most complicated. That's where we get our biggest bang for our buck. And I think absolutely for those clients, the worst, the person who should be meeting the gate is someone who's not necessarily wearing a uniform.
But remember, and go back, you said that they've been let down by society, and society's also been let down by them. And we do need to see that in two ways. And there is a danger that we seem as if we're saying, well, the only people that we have to support are the offenders. Remember, that role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is entirely around supporting the victim. Often the same people.
I agree.
Of course.
But
Often the same people.
all we're trying to do is create less victims by people not going on to reoffend. And if you have to house someone and it takes you 6 hours down the HPU to do it, if you just give them a piece of paper, they're going to carry on offending because they won't be housed. If you have a trained peer advisor who can go down to the HPU and get someone housed because they spend the 6 hours advocating on their behalf, going the extra mile, then you reduce reoffending.
I mean, we have found a very effective role for the police in what we call a supportive compliance in London, where the neighbourhood police do go around and knock on the door the first week somebody's on a community order or a licence, and one checks they're living where they said they were living, because actually, and we do have to protect victims, so there is the public protection side here as well, and that's been very helpful. And also then they, they're demonstrating that they know they're there, they're reminding them when their appointments are with us. So there is a role, I think, for us all to work together in this.
But that's the partnership bit. I see that, but it's fundamentally about this notion that Chris Grayling said when he launched this a few weeks ago. I want somebody at the gate to meet them, and that person will then, as it were, guide them through to hopefully a rehabilitated future. You're not saying that you want a policeman to do that, are you?
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is, I think research tells us that the one-to-one relationship is key. So in a sense, it could be the peer mentor, but it could be their probation officer. That's the important bit. That's what research tells us. That, and the other bit is around hope, which again I think a peer mentor can help with. And the third thing is starting things quickly. The quicker you start something, the quicker you pick people up, the more likely it is to be successful. So that's why the through the gate bit's important. In fact, and we talked earlier about doing it even earlier than they're coming through the gate, doing it at the very beginning when they start in custody. So for me, they're the key three things. It doesn't matter who's doing it.
But it depends on the risk. It depends on the risk of the people. You've got to be able to work that through to the right person.
I'm going to take questions in one sec.
Just very, very quickly, this has got to be focused on what's most effective. And one of the lessons we've learned working embedded in communities from a charity point of view, from a voluntary sector point of view, is that whether we like this or not, it's true, often working with a mentor who is part of the establishment or viewed or perceived by the offender as part of the establishment is less effective than the sort of approach that Rob and I are describing.
Is there evidence to support that?
Yeah, there is evidence. Well, and certainly on the basis of the experience that we've had for 50 years in NACRO, we know the sorts of relationships we were able to develop with offenders. And so, for instance, the retention rates that we have in comparison to other organisations, often public bodies, is significantly better. And if you can keep people engaged, you can start over time to make a difference to behaviour.
Okay, take a question there, and gentleman there. Hold on one sec. Here first, and then behind you.
Thanks, Max Chambers from Policy Exchange. I just wonder, we seem to be quite focused at the moment on a mentoring role and something that's quite similar to prison, and that it might be that's very effective. But I just wonder whether there are other things that we're not talking about. So, for instance, voluntary electronic monitoring or cognitive behavioural therapy. There are other things as well, and I just wonder if there's a particular gaps that any of the panel have identified where actually payment by results might allow for new investment in other services that might help to deliver disproportionate benefits in terms of reoffending.
Okay, I'm going to take the question from the gentleman there. Just coming.
It was a comment to Paul, really. It's Robin Bannon from Essex Probation. If the effectiveness of mentors relies on their being outside the system, are we not therefore going the wrong way in trying to bring them into it?
Okay, all right. Rob, let's try and broaden this out. We'll come on to that point in a second, but Max's point about the way in which communities could operate a whole range of other services beyond just that sort of mental guiding somebody through. Are there avenues which perhaps we haven't really explored that we should be going down and thinking about how payment by results might be able to help us reach those?
I mean, there's all sorts of new technologies which are out there, which Max alluded to. But I mean, to me, it's just a very simple process. You know, we are dealing with a human being. And Lord Ramsbottom once said, it's all pants. And I thought that's not very bright for someone who's a Lord. And he meant people are not things. What do people need when they come out? It's blindingly simple. They need to be able to source some sort of secure accommodation. The sad reality on the ground is that that's not a reality for a lot of people coming out of prison. So if you don't get that base right, you might as well forget all the work that's gone into prison. Prison should be a place where people learn skills, ability, but it's also a place where they actually are more likely to come out of prison, less likely to offend, because things have been put in place for them for support. So without accommodation, all the work, all the expense that goes in, and without any support, it's wasted.
And do you think the communities are going to be persuaded? Because I mean, David makes an important point here. A lot of people are going to see resources piled into helping an ex-offender coming out of jail find a house, and they might well be saying, actually, I can't find a bloody house.
Well, I mean, and there's a lot less statutory stock now than there used to be.
Yeah.
So organisations like ourselves have become very nimble. We have to start, where feasible, we start using the private rental sector. Yeah. But we have to add support into that. The benefits laws change, that makes it more complicated. We have to think a way around that. But if they're not housed, you're going to have very dangerous, difficult people, inappropriately housed, sofa surfing, who will be able to create thousands more victims of crime simply because we haven't got the basics right.
Paul?
Well, you're absolutely right that if you know, in a wider sense, how we sell this to the public at large, that is a vital issue. But we're not doing that very well at the moment because, you know, the media debate is driven by the need for ever more punishment. But there is a challenge for us, whatever the design of the delivery, whether it's what we currently do, what we do in the future, we've got to take seriously how public and people in the communities that offenders return to feel about what's happening. Now, if we can evidence to them that we can get better value and better outcomes, then over time, if you can evidence that, over time, I suspect there will be more and more people who feel more and more comfortable with what's going on. If you can't evidence that, you've got a problem.
David, from a PCC's point of view, I mean, this, you make the point that actually the public do want people to be punished, and they certainly don't want to think that offenders are getting, more resources thrown at them to get their lives together than, law-abiding citizens. How are you going to square that circle in public?
Well, I mean, I think it is, and a lot of that is very, very difficult. And I do reflect on the honest taxpayer who doesn't get the house and doesn't get the job, compared to the person who you've got to be very careful, because if a person comes out of jail, then gets a job and gets housed, you can see how people start coming to the wrong conclusions, and I think you have to be careful. What do you do? Well, one of the main themes through the plan is, offender pays, and so not always can those offenders pay, but where they can, actually self-funded rehabilitation is exactly the sort of area I want to look at. And we all know how that works around people who do speeding, for instance, and we're not necessarily talking about that sort of person who's been through jail.
I can't imagine, with respect, but a lot of prisoners will not have many resources.
But I mean, if we're only talking about prisoners, that's one thing. But actually, I'm looking at that whole criminal justice system, where
somebody coming out of jail and they need a house, and they haven't got a beam to their name. How do you convince your voters that actually it is valuable to help that person to a house when there are law-abiding people who can't get a house?
Well, it's difficult, and that's where leadership has to come in, isn't it? I mean, so you have to make the case, which has been made very well, around how you stop people offending by getting them into a job, getting them into housing, and actually perhaps even breaking some of those relationships they already have, so that they have that fresh start. I think we're all probably signed up to that. But that doesn't mean to say that it's simple, because frankly, many people out there will find it very difficult to accept that through going through prison, that they are more entitled to housing than that person who has had a blameworthy life throughout. So I mean, that is always going to be difficult. But I suppose we're going to just have to take that on the chin.
Heather, this Max's point about looking beyond just the obvious and thinking about cognitive behavioural therapy, for instance, or other interventions, voluntary electronic tagging, for instance.
I mean, we do have a wide range. I mean, there's 12 requirements in the community orders. There's actually quite a wide range of interventions available already, and obviously new technologies coming along. I mentioned we're trialling biometrics, and there's various different forms of tagging. But and some of the things we just need more of, particularly mental health and alcohol treatment, which are big, big problems. But I do think this point of community is very important, because I think from a probation perspective, we probably have, over the last sort of 10, 20 years, stepped away more from engaging in our communities. When I first started, you worked on a patch and everybody knew who their probation officer was, and I think we've withdrawn to our offices and treated the offender only and not worked with the family and the community. And I do think there is more we can do. It is a challenge. I always say you have to. It's some people you can win by heart, some people you win by minds, and some people you win on the purse strings. And actually, if you know, there's a lot of money to be saved here by working with offenders and reducing reoffending. And if the other arguments don't work, maybe that one will.
Okay, take some more questions. Lady there. And lady there, and you're better for you guys, you're not coming in here.
Sue Hall, Chair of the Probation Chiefs Association and Chief Exec of West Yorkshire Probation. There's been an awful lot of talk about managing the under 12-month prisoners, but actually Probation Service supervises 240,000 offenders, 2/3 of whom are not prisoners, are people on community orders. And I think far too little attention has been given in this whole debate about managing those huge contracts of bundled community orders that are going to be competed through payment by results. My concern when I look at the way the transforming rehabilitation proposals are designed is that it feels to me that the model of service delivery that's being proposed is one that's been forced into a shape that will fit a PBR approach rather than a sensible approach about how we might go about managing offenders in the community who are on court orders, who have to be supervised in accordance with the demands of the court, who have to be breached if they don't comply with their orders. I'd be interested in the panel's view around the proposal that actually offender management should be split down the middle, that the public sector retains a small interest in high-risk offenders, and that those offenders dealt with that are medium and lower risk are dealt with via a different system. Okay. From where the Probation Chiefs Association stands, that builds in delay into the system, expense into the system, inefficiency into the system, and we know from all the big child protection scandals that where you have problems in people in the system communicating with each other, sharing information and working together, that's where you get problems.
All right, thank you very much. Question over here.
Yes, I just wanted to ask why we're really comparing housing that is permanent versus potentially hostels that you release people to and they know where they're going before they've ever left prison, and they could be met at the gate and taken to those, perhaps with some degree of support, hopefully drug-free hostels. I've seen lots of people come off wrapped programs who end up in sort of shooting galleries, more or less, or drinking places as hostels, and they're fortunate. But aside from that, there are people who are released miles away from anywhere that they have. They're of no fixed abode. They get, what is it, £52 or something like that, and no visible place that they have to go to, like your Bristol chap. Why can't we know before they've ever left where they're going to go and at least have the opportunity to have a room in a drug-free wing? We're not comparing this with law-abiding citizens.
We have discussed drug-free wings, but thank you for that. Paul McDowell, yeah, why, I mean, housing, yes, why not more thought to sort of hospitals and helping people first steps?
Well, I think absolutely right. I mean, NACRA has a number of schemes up and down the country where we provide, we target ex-offenders as a housing association, and we try to achieve exactly those things. And when you talk to ex-offenders who have travelled a number of times through the prison system and now into the hostel environment, they don't often tell a very positive story. And so what we're trying to do is explore something more positive that gives them those sorts of environments and builds on the opportunity. Back to that issue about joining together different interventions, not just housing but other shortcomings that they might need. So I think that's absolutely right.
And Rob, Sue's point, which we also discussed a bit this morning, on the split between high risk and the rest. I mean, do you have anxieties about how that might work in terms of offenders' risk changing?
I mean, yeah, risk is not it's a very sort of fluid thing, and I mean, but it's interesting. I mean, the Peterborough work where we're doing, which is working with under 12 months, 95% have a housing need, 23% slept rough preceding going to prison, 68% had a substance misuse, and half didn't even have a bank account. So people can go very quickly from being low risk to high risk, and I don't think it's around risk. I mean, even the very high risk probably would benefit from having a really intensive peer support put in, and it's about partnership. It's about us working with probation, even with the very high risk ones, and actually the lower risk ones, actually maybe getting a different sort of touch, but looking at people, the intensity of work they need in a sort of more intelligent light. I think the thing we're really missing here is actually we should all want to be able to work together, or the system should allow us all to work together, playing to our unique strengths. Macro has a couple of very good bits, they do. Probation have fantastic at certain bits. So Giles Trust has something to really add in one level. So it's about how to get the best out of it. At the moment, we just seem to be bashing each other, whereas actually what we should be trying to do is making sure that only people play to their strengths. And that's hopefully what this transition is all about.
There's something really important about risk. I mean, I think it was Liz Coddlebank that said in one of her reports that a very high proportion of the most serious crime is committed by people who are currently assessed as medium risk. And we need to be really clear about this. Just because somebody is currently defined as high risk does not necessarily mean they pose immediately the highest of risks. It's not as clear or simple as that.
Okay, all right, I tell you what, because people may have spotted that the Secretary of State has crept in and is listening at the side there. So I'm going to draw a close to this session now in order to hear from the Minister. So if you would show your appreciation to